I'd like to talk to you about the most important dimension of medical care, the spiritual dimension. And please, I'm not talking about religion. That is because the essence of spirituality is connection, meaningful connection. And each one of us gathered here today is either connected to someone, to something, or to some place, all of which brings meaning and purpose into our world. Our spiritual connections are as unique as we are. And if we're unwell or sick, we find ourselves turning to what brings meaning into our lives. Because at times like these, it'll be those unique connections that'll provide us with hope in the midst of uncertainty, joy in our pain, peace in the middle of the storm, and comfort in our suffering. And in my world as a palliative care doctor, I've seen and I've studied the value of spirituality at the end of life. And I'm here to talk to you about how this matters to all of our healthcare experiences. This is because each one of us has a spirit inside of us that connects to unique aspects of our life. And this expression of spirituality is not just important for our human experience, but to our own personal healthcare. This is what medicine needs to prioritize to provide true whole person care. And it's possible. Let me begin by introducing you to Stephen. Stephen was 36 years old when I met him. He was a good man, a family man, and a few years younger than me. And because of that, we clicked. But our tastes in life couldn't have been more different. Stephen was into heavy music, drinking beer with his friends, and he drove a loud Ford V8. Louder and faster were how Stephen lived his life. But Stephen was dying. He'd been diagnosed with an aggressive cancer too late. And because of this, he was racing against time, against a fast-moving cancerous enemy. His treatment regime was grueling. And because of this, he suffered several complications to everything that was tried. Every win was met with a setback, each more severe than the last, until one particularly severe complication left him gravely unwell, languishing in a hospital bed hundreds of kilometres away from home. There he languished, and his symptoms worsened. The pain that had been his constant companion reduced him to tears, and he struggled to stand, let alone feed himself. And he required more and more opiates to palliate his distress. It looked like it was the end. His wife Sarah stood and watched, and she knew that she needed to get him home. "There's no life left in his eyes, Jonathan," she said to me over the phone as we discussed his transfer. A few days later, I went to see him, and what I saw utterly shocked me. This is because he looked nothing like what his doctors had described over the phone. There he sat with his sunglasses on, smoking a cigarette, talking to a group of his friends that had driven his prized collection of cars over for him to look at. And when he saw me, he smiled and he lifted up his glasses. And for the first time in many months, I saw life in his eyes. There was joy at being back home, reconnected to his family and to the people and to the places that brought meaning into his life. Stephen was still dying, but now he was alive in his spirit. And this caused something interesting to happen in his body. His pain simmered down and his energy returned. Even but for the briefest of moments, Stephen wasn't bedbound anymore. And see, we'd done nothing to change his treatment. We'd simply brought him home. And by doing so, Stephen was able to reconnect with what brought his life meaning. He was even able to see his father and make amends. All of this fueled his spirit and brought him peace as he faced his own death. Stephen died 3 days later. As he did, it allowed his symptoms to settle and he was at peace despite his young age and the ravages of his disease. Our spirit is the center of our being and the foundation on which our physical bodies and our psychological presence are built upon. And it is the spirit in a person that makes them whole by connecting them to those unique aspects of their life. And it's for this reason that the spiritual dimension must be considered in medicine as we care for our health. Because, see, it's useless for doctors to prescribe medicines, initiate fancy treatments, or aim to cure disease, all while neglecting that our physical bodies rest on a spiritual foundation. Our spirits are the foundation of our physical selves. And see, in medicine, we know that spiritual distress can worsen our quality of life and amplify our symptoms. Spiritual distress has been shown to worsen physical symptoms such as nausea, pain, and fatigue. It can deepen psychological distress, such as anxiety and depression. And worst of all, spiritual distress has been shown to weaken those relationships with those closest to us and those providing us with care. The spiritual dimension matters both in life and in medicine. It was French philosopher Pierre de Chardin who said, "We're not just human beings having a spiritual experience, we're spiritual beings having a human experience." When we connect to what is meaningful to us in the midst of our suffering, it offers us the peace to deal with what we're facing. When Stephen's spirit reconnected to what brought him life, it allowed his physical symptoms to settle, and it allowed his energy to return, and it brought him peace as he faced his own death. And the same is true for you and me. Okay, so I'm going to get personal here. I'm going to talk about your spirituality. See, whether we care to acknowledge it or not, each one of us has an expression of spirituality. And the best way to think about our spirituality is through the lens of connection. What are you connected to? What brings meaning into your world? What brings you joy? What gives you hope? What helps you get through difficult times? These are ways to think about your own spirituality. In palliative care, I love talking about spirituality to the most unlikely people. And I want to talk to you about Bob, who was a 78-year-old farmer who was referred to our service for late-stage heart failure with only a prognosis of a few months. He was referred for ongoing physical and psychological distress. And according to his wife, Susan, Bob had never set foot in a church or had any type of spiritual beliefs of his own. But when I started talking about spirituality through the lens of connection, that's when Bob started talking. I simply asked him, "Bob, what lights up your world? What brings you joy?" And so Bob opened up about his connection to the family farm that had been in his family for 4 generations and had provided 4 generations with a good way of life and a good living. He talked about his connection to Susan, who'd been married to for 50 years, and he talked about his 5 grandchildren who called him Poppy. Finally, he talked about this connection to the wisdom that had guided him through the seasons of life. And so, as a team, these were the connections that we centralised in Bob's care. We certainly used medicines and other forms of treatment, but these were the connections that we kept at the middle of what we did. This is true whole person care, care that inquires and considers a person's personal connections and tailors medical care around them. And little did Bob know that his simple answers captured the essence of spirituality, a connection or a deep personal relationship. And as spiritual beings, we live in connection with 4 main areas in our life. We live in connection with ourselves. We live in connection with the significant others around us. We live in connection with nature and our environment. And finally, we live in connection with the sacred and the significant. As a doctor, it's important for me to inquire as to how my patients find meaning and tailor care to what brings them life. This is because what we're connected to is what we'll turn to when we're facing something difficult, such as the long road of a chronic illness, or the uncertainty of a new and unexpected diagnosis, or the perils of unrelenting pain. And finding meaning in pain is something that I know about myself. See, a few years ago, I injured myself quite severely. And what I thought would be only a few weeks off work turned into months of painful rehabilitation. In the throes of my recovery, my return to being a doctor was less than certain. This is because of the pain and the weakness and the numbness that I was experiencing. My mind raced as I saw my life changing before my eyes. I was utterly broken, disconnected. And in the midst of this suffering, I received a piece of wisdom from the most unlikely source that changed everything. An occupational therapist that was treating me at the time asked me to consider my enforced time off as a gift to slow down, a gift to reconnect with my family, and a gift to gain perspective on my life. She was right. I'd lost connection with what truly mattered. I was thoroughly and absolutely disconnected from those central connections in my life. And as I look back now, that was my defining moment that brings me here to talking to you today. She'd helped me find meaning in my suffering. And as I reconnected to this new purpose, my spirit came alive. And like Stephen, my pain simmered down and my mood lifted as I reconnected to those things that were important to me. As Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, Dr. Viktor Frankl famously said in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, life is never made unbearable by our circumstance, but only through a lack of meaning and purpose. Finding meaning in suffering, that's what my experience taught me. It took this painful experience for me to realize that this same thing was happening in the lives of my patients, and it changed the way that I practiced medicine. But I faced an uphill battle. See, medicine today offers us unparalleled benefits. We're living longer, our treatments are getting better, and we're discovering something new every day. But the cost of this advancement is that the soul of medicine has been lost. This is because what many of these advancements fail to recognize is that humans do not simply exist in the physical realm, but we are multi-dimensional beings who are created for connection. And when those connections in our lives are broken, we suffer. Think about how you're living at the moment. Comfort, well-being, money, and success are what drives many of us. I say this because this is what drives me too. We may connect to what is meaningful, but it's not always central. But when our health or well-being are compromised, this occupies our every waking thought. And it can become all-consuming and chasing after physical treatments at the expense of what matters most. And in a sad twist of irony, at the end of our lives, when we hit the bottom, we realize it was those important, unique connections that mattered most in life and in our suffering. This is how medicine is being practiced at the moment, with the deep and enduring focus on the physical. But there's a better way. Our spirit is the foundation of our being, and what we connect to in life is unique, but also profoundly healing. And simply asking your patient, what helps you get through difficult times? What brings meaning into your life? Are simple but powerful ways to help them transcend what they are facing, offering them joy in their pain and comfort in their suffering. This is whole person medicine and what you and I would want too if we were sick. Thank you.